again. This is now Furnal Equinox 2024. We're back again, better than ever. Now shave, look at that. Early shave in the morning means less fur. I, for one, again, welcome our internet overlord. YouTube, TikTok that will be banned soon, and all other sort of social media. Hi! So nice to see you again.
Hey, thank you.
Well, I'm going to get started, ladies and gentlemen, gentle furs. My name is Kindle. I have been hosting this panel for a couple years now at Furnal Equinox. Welcome to Urban Homesteading 101. Has anyone attended this panel before? Okay, one or two. Well, you'll probably hear a lot of the same stuff, but I have been experimenting a bit more this past year, so I will have some new things to talk about as well. And my handy dandy little slideshow here. So I'm going to jump right into it. This is basically going to be me talking about how I started out as the pandemic bread guy and went all the way up to harvesting wildflowers in my neighborhood and making wine out of it. So yeah, we're going to cover quite a few topics, but we're going to start with bread. So a big reason that I started getting into this was during the pandemic, money was a little tighter and I had more free time. So I wanted to start doing some things for myself. So I said, I'll teach myself to bake bread. It turned out it was a lot easier than I expected. Bakers that tell you like to get the perfect loaf of bread, you have to do this and that and get this right. A lot of these hobbies can be as complex or as simple as you want to make it. You can absolutely just throw some flour, water, and yeast in a bowl and bake it, and that is going to be bread, and you can eat it. And when you're doing it for yourself at home, like, do you really care if it's perfect? Like, as long as you can toast it up and spread some peanut butter on it? So, bread making, yeah, very easy, very simple. I would just do it on a sheet pan. I wouldn't even use bread molds or anything like that, and I ended up with these nice, round, dense loaves that were very delicious to eat and share with friends. If you ever have someone come over to your house and you go, hey, do you want to have some of my homemade bread? I guarantee you they are going to be so excited to try like this food that you made for them. And another thing I would do with my old bread is make bread pudding. This is a dessert some people might have tried. You might even see it at restaurants sometimes. All you need is slightly stale bread, eggs, milk, and sugar. And you're basically making a custard. I worked at the time at a restaurant, and if you work in a restaurant, there are often opportunities to take things home. So if we had bread that had just expired, I would get free bread, and that's half the cost of making one of these. And I just use disposable pie tins from the grocery store. They're a couple bucks. This is one I made that I actually made as a savory dish. Yes. So I took the sugar out of it, and I added some spices and things like oregano, and I increased the number of eggs in it. And what I got out of it, because of the bread, was it was very much like an omelet, but it wouldn't go like all rubbery like eggs do when you put it in the fridge. The bread retains a lot of moisture, and that's going to keep your eggs nice and fluffy. And what it was for me was just a very good breakfast. I could make it on my day off, have it in the fridge for the week. You cut off a piece, heat it up in the microwave, throw a little ketchup on it, and it's delicious. This is it baking. You can see I use all different types of bread. I've made it out of old waffles. I've made it out of like Christmas breads and things like that. Egg breads. This one here, I put frozen blueberries on top as a bit of a garnish. A lot of the other ones I would sprinkle brown sugar on top so that it would sort of melt as it baked. Cutting into it, this one was made with pancakes. It was delightful. And I have even started making it at work as a special for actually serving. If we have some bread that was for an event or something, we didn't use all of it, well, you throw another couple bucks worth of ingredients in it and sell it for $7. The boss really likes you for that one. This is banana bread. We all buy bananas. Sometimes they start getting spotty. You throw them in the freezer. And whenever you feel like it, with a couple extra ingredients, some flour, some baking soda, you get a delicious dessert. Oh, and chocolate chips. Always add some chocolate chips.
Always.
Also, I just like to say, if any of you guys have anything to add or questions or comments, like I'm more than welcome to have this as a roundtable. A lot of people have their own things they've tried. There's stuff that I haven't tried at home yet, or maybe never will. Go ahead.
I know one cool one that I saw added was with banana bread. If you add like a little bit of cocoa powder into it, it makes it into like almost like a chocolatey.
Oh, like a chocolate cake?
Yeah, almost.
That I will have to try, because cocoa powder is another great thing to have in your pantry.
Walnuts and cardamom.
Cardamom. I've definitely added nuts before, but that sounds delicious. This is making a marmalade. So I got into doing various jams and jellies because it's a fantastic way to preserve fruits. And I'll tell you guys this, there's an app I started using around the same time called Flash Foods.
Yes.
All of the Loblaws branded stores will have this, and they put fruits, vegetables, meats, breads, and stuff up for 50% off. And you just have to go there and pick it up that day. I would get like 5-pound bags of fruit for $5. And if you're not going to eat it right away, this is a great way to preserve it.
Another food-saving app you want to consider is Too Good To Go.
That's the one where you order boxes, right?
No.
Okay.
So it's restaurants and like other food places that have food that is still good. They just won't be able to sell it after a certain date.
Okay, so like the restaurant side of a grocery store.
Yeah. So
I love that.
I got like what 3 things of like Filipino food for like what $15 when it's normally going to be like 3 times that amount.
Yeah.
So.
My mom has that. We got a huge box of like Tim Hortons stuff for $5.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to be downloading that app.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So this is my finished marmalade. The real difference between like marmalade and jam is you leave the peel on the fruit. It adds a little bit more bitterness to it. I have always loved orange marmalade. This is grapefruit marmalade. Same thing, just a little more sour, a little more tart.
Do you add salt to yours, like little sprinkles?
I haven't before, but that's a good segue because another thing I've made is bacon jam.
Nice.
Working in a restaurant, we had a lot of leftover bacon. So I just told myself, let's find out what I can do with old bacon. And bacon and onion jam is so good on crackers or toast. And probably not very good for you, but I mean, you got some protein in there. I've also made apple jam. I've even used crab apples because, I mean, if you're wandering around the suburbs, there are a lot of crab apple trees. And if you get in good with the neighbors, they'll probably let you pick them up off their lawn because then they don't have to. And if you get them when they're fresh, crab apples can be delicious. You just have to add a lot more sugar, which is a lot of things. I buy the 10-kilogram bags of sugar now.
I was going to ask that. I was going to say, what kind of sugar do you use? Because I'm more on the reclaiming it from nature's thing, so I do a lot of like maple sugar. So making maple syrup, then rendering it down to sugar. I was going to say, if you tried maple sugar, I don't know if...
I haven't. Maple syrup or maple tapping is on my list probably for next year. I did some research. You can buy tree taps for like $5 online. And if there are maple trees in like, well, probably not a park.
Just if you ever
just along the side of the road.
Don't cook it down in your garage or anywhere you want to live, because it will make the whole area A, stink of maple syrup, and 2, you can pass away from the smoke, from the burning of fuel.
Yeah.
Just do it outside.
Do it outdoors, and ideally, if you have the option, wood, not propane.
Yes.
The maple syrup will actually take the flame.
So we're not going to taste the meat, not the heat.
Exactly. Exactly.
This is a picture of bacon onion jam. Unfortunately, I ate mine too fast to take pictures of it. But yeah, that's what it looks like. And apple jam. Again, not mine, but the jars you can get at the grocery store. You can get 12 packs of them for like $10. You can reuse everything but the lids. You can reuse the lids, just be very careful. Wash them, sanitize them, and absolutely take a close look at them when you open it.
So they do make reusable ones. Have you tried those ones? I was thinking about buying some.
I mean, I have used just like
plastic.
old. Oh, interesting. I've used even just old pasta jars when I make my own pasta sauce.
Oh,
it's just
the lids.
Just the lids.
Just the lids.
I haven't tried reusable ones. Also, if I'm reusing jars and lids, typically that is not something I'm going to put on the shelf in my basement. That is something that will stay in the fridge until I eat it, or I will freeze it if I'm making something like a pasta sauce. Pasta sauce is a great thing to make at home. You're going to pay upwards of $6 for pre-made pasta sauce at the grocery store. You can grow your own tomatoes, or you can just buy crushed tomatoes. Like an equivalently sized can is about $1. And all you're adding to it is some spices, and you can have that delicious custom pasta sauce that you would buy at the store. You can even look up the recipes for them, probably, because someone has figured out how to make a sauce that tastes just like your favorite one for half the price. I also bought a dehydrator. That was about $50 at Canadian Tire. I waited for it to go on sale. Fantastic way to make delicious snacks. I have made potato chips in my dehydrator. These are cucumber chips. The potato chips?
No, the cucumber.
Oh, the cucumber chips? Very good. I soaked them in a salt and vinegar mixture before, so I had
It's like
salt.
halfway pickle chips.
It is, and I mean, you could probably add dill, or I would try using dill pickle popcorn spice. That is actually surprisingly good to add to other things. Like if you've ever had a hot honey dill hot sauce, that's just Frank's Red Hot, honey, and dill pickle popcorn seasoning.
That's hilarious.
So these things, you'll run them for 12 hours typically, or 8 hours, and you can dry out things. I will get into in a bit kombucha. One of the byproducts of making homemade kombucha is what's called a SCOBY. Long story short, it's a bacterial yeast colony that lives in the kombucha. When I get too many of them, I will dehydrate them and make kombucha jerky. It sounds weird, but it's basically protein. And that's what you're getting out of it.
What does it? Oh, I guess you're going to go into detail that later.
I mean, I can tell you, it kind of tastes like apples and vinegar. It's interesting, it's chewy, but I mean, if you like beef jerky, you would probably take to it, and it is really, really healthy for you. So this is the finished product. You can see they got nice and shiny, nice and shriveled up, and I can tell you they were delicious. It's just cucumbers get way smaller because they're mostly water, so you need a lot of cucumbers in your dehydrator to get a snack. But again, if you're looking for things on sale and you're just going to go home, cut out a few spots, and slice it up right then and there, it doesn't matter. And speaking of cucumbers, I have also made pickles. So this is me in my kitchen. That is my canning bath. It is the proper way to can things. But that is pickled watermelon rind. So I bought the watermelon, I ate all the delicious watermelon, and then I took just the pith, the white part on the outside. It has pretty much the consistency of a cucumber. And it's a little tough, but you're adding, it's mostly vinegar and water and some salt and spices and things. You boil it, you pour it on top, it's going to soften it up, you're going to get a delicious pickle, and you can do whatever flavor pickle you want. I've done dill pickles, I've done cinnamon and star anise was a very interesting one. Another great life hack is if you buy a jar of pickles from the store, you don't have to pour the brine down the sink. You can use it to make more pickles. All you have to do is boil it and pour it into a jar. And this is what's called quick pickling. It is not a fermentation. You're not letting any bacteria get in there. There is also fermentation pickling, which takes much longer. It is how we pickle, for example, hot peppers when we're making hot sauce, because part of that process is to ferment them. That takes weeks. It's a little more finicky. This is just boil vinegar, pour it on top, eat a delicious pickle. I have, interestingly enough, also seen someone do quicker pickling using a vacuum chamber.
Yes.
You put your vinegar with your cucumbers in it in a vacuum chamber, and when you reduce it near to vacuum, all of the air comes out of the cucumbers. And then when you restore the pressure, you actually see the level of vinegar in the jar just go, because those cucumbers are trying to return to their natural size and density. So they just suck up all the vinegar, and it is literally instant pickles. So, I mean, if you ever get a vacuum sealer, try that out. I haven't played with it because those things are expensive. So that was my finished product. These were properly canned, so they're shelf stable. Basically, once you have your delicious food in your glass jar, you loosely put the lid on it, and you submerge it in boiling water. That's going to do two things. It's going to sterilize it, and it's going to heat up the air in the top of the jar so it expands, and that's going to push air out. So it's going to expand as it heats up, push all the air out. You leave it in there for about 5 minutes, and then you take it out and you tighten the lid. And everybody knows when you buy a jar of something at the store, when you crack it, it goes. That is the air returning to the inside of it. And that is how you know if you properly canned your food. Because when all that hot air is expanded, the lid of the jar is going to be up. You tighten the lid so that it's sealed, and you leave it on the counter to cool down. And as it cools down, that air shrinks, and you're sitting doing whatever, reading a book, playing a game, and you hear those pops from your kitchen. And it is the most satisfying thing in the world, because it means you did everything right. And you can take that into your basement and put it on your little preserve shelf and then eat it a year later. And that is really cool. It's great for being on a budget, because food preservation is something that, just to get a little political here, society is kind of trained out of us, because we are supposed to go to the store and spend our money and buy things, and they don't want you to know that you can keep a lot of those things and reuse them and recycle them. You have something to say?
Yeah, just because
Yeah.
my grandparents like to cook their own tomato sauce, and they use the same jarring method.
Mhm.
I know that one tip that they also use for it is when they're first storing them, like first little bit, they'll, after it does pop, they'll turn the jars upside down, so that way the liquid actually adds to like a seal so that the air can't go through it.
Interesting. So basically they're letting a little bit dry around the rim. Yeah.
And afterwards, yeah.
Which is that's a really good tip. I'm going to try that. And it is a good point. Oh, go ahead.
Also, make sure your food isn't moldy before you put it in the jars. That happened to me a couple of times because I'm dumb and unobservant.
I mean, yeah, and that segues really nicely. If you are trying to do this and you are storing things, just always, take a good look at it, give it a sniff when you're opening that jar, because things can happen. Like, obviously, we can't account for everything. Even stuff you buy at the store will occasionally be defective. And, botulism, other food-borne illnesses, you're probably not going to get seriously ill, but you will have a bad time for about 24 hours. It's happened to me before. Go ahead.
It's important to remember that how long you're supposed to leave it in the water bath depends on the acidity, how big the jar is, so that you can make sure it's properly sterilized all the way through.
That is a very good point.
Whatever you're doing, take a Google, see how long it's recommended for the size
Yes.
that you have and the food you're.
So when I first started picking up all of these new hobbies and things I would do around the house, I was doing a couple days of research. I would watch YouTube videos, I would look up Google articles, I would look for people's grandma's recipes, and I would do exactly what they said. Depending on what you're doing, it matters more or less. But while you're sort of learning this new skill, you should listen to people who have been doing it before. Because if you have this cool idea to do it differently, like you wait for a second and think, okay, well, someone's great-grandmother might have thought, oh, what if I can things this way, and tried it, and then their whole family knows that's a bad idea. They might not put that in their little Google article for you. They might just say, this is the right way to do it. So follow their advice. But then once you are more comfortable with it and you've learned more of the reasons why you're doing these things these certain ways, you can start to riff on it. You can start to change things up or combine things from different recipes or add things that you know you like if you're talking about spices, or if you followed a pickle recipe and it came out more vinegary than you like. Reduce the amount of vinegar, Google what happens if I reduce the amount of vinegar in my pickle brine, and then it's going to tell you should adjust your recipe accordingly, and then you know to do that. So you're building this knowledge base, you're building this skill. Sometimes it's the difference between being, like I've worked in a kitchen for 15 years, I have been taught how to cook, but once you have down the fundamentals of, for example, of how to make a stir fry, you know how to make a stir fry, and you can take any ingredients you want and you know how to make a stir fry. So once you get those fundamentals for any of these hobbies, then you start changing things up. Go ahead.
I had a quick question. Have you ever made vinegar, like apple cider vinegar or anything like that?
I have not, specifically because when I make my own alcohol, I drink it.
Okay.
If I made something I did not want to drink, I would definitely pick up a mother. A mother is the term for anything fermented by like a mushroom or anything fermented by bacteria or yeast. A mother is typically the little blob of live bacteria that floats around inside it doing its job, converting, in this example, alcohol into vinegar. You can find them. For example, for my kombucha, I just started with raw kombucha that I bought at the grocery store. I knew it would have the live bacteria I needed in it, and I knew the ingredients I needed to give it to make it happy and healthy in this environment. Because at this point, you're dealing with a living thing. So this is dandelion honey. It is what the bees do, but we're kind of hacking it. So bees take nectar, flick it in and out on their tongues. What they're doing is dehydrating it, removing a lot of the moisture from it, and condensing it. It's the same as like a simple syrup you'd use for a cocktail. It is sugar water from plants. So to make this, I harvested about 10 pounds of dandelion heads from the field next to my house, put them with water and sugar and some citrus fruits, boil them a whole bunch into a tea, and then reduce it until it's as thick as I'd like. You have a question?
So something that makes me nervous about, or especially like urban foraging, is like what pesticides you're being used. So
Yes.
is there a place to find that information?
I was actually, I was just about to talk about urban foraging, which is a big part of homesteading. You are going to want to be careful about pesticides and things in city parks. It is typically just recommended on cultivated municipal land. Don't do it. If you have a vehicle, you can go out to a farmer's field or something, and there will probably be a million dandelions if you walk 20 feet in. And you know they probably haven't been doing anything because the dandelions are there. And also anything you bring home, you're going to wash it. Just get a colander or something, throw it in the sink, rinse it for 5 minutes in cold water and stir it around. It's just like you should wash your fruit when you take it home from the grocery store. You definitely need to be aware of those things if you're going out and getting stuff. Also, do not forage near walking or right beside walking paths because people walk their dogs and dogs pee and poo. So just go 5 feet into the bush. You're reducing that chance of encountering something like that by like 10 times. And it's fun to go different places. I have lilac bushes beside my house that I've done things with. I have a field of dandelions. I've also dug up dandelion roots, and you can wash them, chop them up, put them in your oven at a very low heat for a little while, and you get something you can make into a tea. So you throw it in your tea ball, you put it in some boiling water for a couple minutes. It is actually a Confederate recipe from the United States during the Civil War. Their supply lines were being broken and they did not have any coffee. And these soldiers were so desperate for anything like coffee that they were just boiling random roots. And they found one. Dandelion roots taste like coffee with none of the caffeine. I have a little jar of it.
Medium
Go.
rare. I was just wondering, you mentioned the lilac trees that you do stuff with. What's it that you do with lilac?
We're going to get to that.
Oh, excellent.
You were asking about roasts?
Yeah.
That depends on how long you roast it. You can choose.
Oh, you roast the...
Yeah, so again, like I learned how to do it from a YouTube video. So this is me reducing my dandelion tea, which is, I had my sugar and my water and my dandelion nectar, but I hadn't made it thick yet. And as you can see, my kitchen is filling up with steam because you are just boiling water. And that is a picture of them resting. I canned this, so it has a tea towel on top, which, not sure why, but it reduces the chance the jars will shatter. Good?
Just looping back to the dandelion root thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's another like roadside flower that's really similar to dandelions for roasting the roots. It's really similar to coffee. I think it's chicory. Yeah, chicory.
Chicory I have heard of. I haven't personally spotted it. I am from Thunder Bay, Ontario. It is a slightly different growing zone. But yeah, there are so many plants in cities that you can eat. Another thing, definitely do your research. There are a good number of plants that you can eat that have a plant that look very similar to them that you can eat it once. So do your research, and if you are unsure, just pass it by. Everyone knows what a dandelion looks like. Start with that, or talk to an expert. There are people all over the place that will do foraging walks or have Facebook groups. like for local foraging, you can post pictures, you can ask questions, and you can start providing information or host your own panels. It's one of the fun things about it is foraging and homesteading is a community, and there are so many people putting so much information out there and sharing it and building on it and just making this awesome community of people that have these super cool hobbies. That is some of my dandelion root in my little mushroom jar. Yeah, it makes a delicious tea. It's really nice to bring out every once in a while, and that's what it looks like. Dandelion roots are also shockingly easy to dig up if you have a good shovel, because dandelions are a taproot plant. So those really big dandelion plants will have this massive 10-inch long root, and that's a couple cups of fake coffee for you. This is a picture of two things. First, we are talking about the kombucha. So on your left side there is my kombucha. I bought those jugs. They are punch dispensers at Canadian Tire for about $20. That is important because kombucha is a fermentation that requires access to oxygen. Alcohol, which we'll talk about in a little bit, does not want oxygen. Oxygen introduces contamination. But the kombucha, those yeast and those bacteria in there, they love to have a breath of fresh air. So I sealed it with a coffee filter over the top to prevent fruit flies from getting at it, because it is very fruity and delicious to them. Kombucha, what it is a recipe from about 4,000 years ago in China. And somebody had some delicious black tea they had made that was sitting on their windowsill, and something started growing in it. And for some reason, they decided to try drinking it. And it was awesome. So they kept making it. So kombucha is black tea, like orange pekoe or Earl Grey. You add some sugar, because sugar is going to be the food for your culture, and your culture is yeast and bacteria. It is called a SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of yeast and bacteria. It looks really weird. I probably have a picture of it. It is sitting in that blue bowl right there, but you can't really see it. No, I don't have a better picture. Anyways, it looks like a jellyfish, just sort of floating on the top of your kombucha. A lot of people think it's gross, but there's a lot of other things we love that we get from yeast and bacteria, like vinegar and alcohol, like who here drank last night? So when you think about it like that, and you kind of get attached to them because you have this little living thing that you have to feed and take care of, and it's your pet. People routinely name them.
What's its name?
So I don't currently have any, but I'm pretty sure my first one was called Bob, because Bob is my name for everything. And you can see there I have some bottles off to the side. This is when I was bottling my kombucha. There's two ways to do it. You can do it in batches, which is you fill it, you allow it to ferment to the strength that you want. The longer you let it go, the stronger it's going to get. And then you drain it all off. You can also do a rolling stock, which is where you will have your kombucha sitting there fermenting away. Once it's tasty, you drink a bunch of it. Once you have like half of it left, you top it up with more fresh tea. And then you sort of always have it on tap. I was doing bottling. I added some lemon to flavor this one. And it comes out like that in bottles. The reason I love kombucha is absolutely packed with antioxidants and probiotics. All those yeast and bacteria are actually very, very good for you. And the vinegar that they make, because it is an organic acid, is also very good for you. It promotes liver and kidney function, pretty good for a hangover. And I actually noticed I was drinking about half a cup of this a day. You don't want to drink too much kombucha because putting too much bacteria in your body at once is going to be a little bad for you. But drinking a little bit of it every day, after a couple months, I had actually noticed that my eating habits changed. And I think it was because my body was just getting healthier and better at digesting food. And I felt really healthy. Go ahead.
For the bottled ones, do you need to burp it?
No, these ones do not produce very much carbon dioxide. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not a scientist, but do you think part of like why your eating habits change is because it changed like your gut microbiome?
That is exactly what I think.
Okay.
There's really good YouTube videos about that if you guys want to look it up. Yes?
So you said black tea.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried other types of tea? I know you said you're making dandelion root. Have you thought of trying it like that?
So I have, with the caveat that for 4,000 years, we have been basically selectively breeding these strains of yeast and bacteria with very specific food sources. So when your kombucha is first starting out, and like I said, I just made some tea, bought some kombucha at the grocery store, poured it in. When it's younger and a little less established, you want to give it pure black tea and sugar. You want to give it the best environment, because these things are a little temperamental. If you screw with their environment too much, it's like a fish tank. If they don't have the right air or water mixture, they will die. And then it starts growing mold, and you feel bad because you've been watching this thing for 3 weeks and you really thought you had it that time. But once you have that healthy established colony, I did experiment a little bit. You typically will never go over a half and half ratio for what tea bags you put in, but you can start using flavored teas like fruit teas and like spice teas. I did Earl Grey, which was very interesting because it added bergamot notes, which are very lemony and acidic. When I would drink this, I would mix it with a little bit of ginger ale because that just made it taste way better. So now we're going to talk about wine. Go ahead.
Before we move on, I think it's important to note that there's alcohol in kombucha, like less than 2%.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So food and health safety and the government allow, I think, up to 0.3% alcohol before it has to be listed. Kombucha will have probably 0.2 or 0.3, but to be honest, so will a can of apple juice from the grocery store. Basically, when they are making any kind of fruit juices, yeast is everywhere. That is just a fact of life. And if a little bit of yeast gets into that fruit juice as they're making it, or even inside the fruit before it's processed, it's going to start very happily consuming sugar and producing alcohol, because that is what yeast does. So there's always going to be a tiny bit in anything that contains fruit sugars. And I guess they had some scientists determine what was a safe level to not care about in humans. But yes, kombucha will have up to probably about 0.3% alcohol, because the yeast produces alcohol and then the bacteria eats it and produces the organic acids, the antioxidants. But there will always be a little bit of bacteria food sort of in limbo. And this had a lot more alcohol in it. This was my very first time making lilac wine. So I took the lilac bushes beside my house, and me and my very helpful sister, Soot, who is also here in the dealer's den, go check out her table, would sit after work every day and just pluck the flowers off of the lilac twigs we had brought inside. It took hours and hours and hours to get it done, but you put on a movie and you sit and you just do it until I would typically have an allergy attack, because I do have a little bit of hay fever, and I would stop. But I got enough lilac, and you can see this is what's called the primary fermentation. It is where I looked up a recipe, and I will say for alcohol, if you get into making it, absolutely follow the recipes and follow them for a long time, because like, you know how everyone says cooking is art and baking is science? Yeah. Fermentation is like the next level of science, because you are doing things like adding a very specific ratio of sugar to water, because alcohol is made by yeast, and typically any strain of yeast you are going to use is going to be, alcohol is poisonous to it. Like, it's byproduct. It's basically living in its own waste. So these different strains will be alcohol tolerant up to a specific percentage, which means they are going to continue to consume sugar and produce alcohol until the ABV is at a certain point, and then it all dies. And at that point, any sugar that's left behind is no longer being consumed. So if you mess up that ratio, you want it to be very close to 100% of the sugar gets consumed. If you have like 10% of the sugar left over, imagine dumping a tablespoon of sugar into a glass of wine and then drinking it. It's just unpleasant. And that's what those recipes are for. They are going to tell you add this many gallons of water, add this much weight of sugar. They will say to add a lot of other things, and this is very much a hobby that can be as complex or as uncomplex as you would like, because I have made the equivalent of prison wine, which was cranberry juice I bought at the grocery store and added yeast to. That is the baseline. It is incredibly simple, and you will get something that you can drink, and it will probably taste like whatever kind of juice you pick. So if your favorite thing to drink is peach juice, you can just make some peach wine, which is a lot of fun. It's great in the winter when you can't go out and forage things. But you can also get very complex. You can get additives, you can get yeast nutrients, you can get special sterilizing chemicals, you can get equipment that lets you accurately measure exactly the amount of alcohol in it once it's finished. Or you can just not bother with any of that. And this is my primary fermentation. You have our lilac petals, your sugar, your water. I again added a little bit of black tea to this because if you're not using grapes, you are not getting what's called tannins, which is what gives a wine its body. Black tea also contains tannins, so it replaces it.
When you made your prison wine, were you using actual like brewer's yeast, or did you just?
I was still using brewer's yeast, and that's a good thing to talk about. There are hundreds of different kinds of brewer's yeast. The one I use almost exclusively is champagne yeast. It is a strain that is known for its resilience. It is very hard for your fermentation to fail where your yeast dies because of some extraneous circumstance. It is also alcohol tolerant up to 18%, which is not a number you should be targeting, but it just means whatever you're doing, all of that sugar is going to go out of it, which is exactly what you want. And if you don't like how it tastes because it's too dry and you are not a dry wine person, add a tiny bit of ginger ale to it and you end up with a sparkling wine and you're replacing those sugars. You can also do crazy things like back sweetening, which is re-adding the sugar before you bottle it. The danger of that is if there is still live yeast, it's going to go into the bottle and it's going to continue to produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. If you see that, sorry?
Explosion.
Oh, exactly. If you see that S-bend with the water bubble in it, that is allowing the carbon dioxide the yeast produces to exit that. Because if it's a sealed container, it's just going to build up pressure. So if you bottle your wine and it still has some live yeast in it, it is going to start building up pressure. And if it builds up too much pressure or you store it in a hot closet on a warm day, I have never had it happen to me, but friends of mine have had it happen to them, and it sounds like a hand grenade exploding in your house. And everything within range of it is going to be covered in sticky alcoholic juice.
You keep the rest of the bottles.
Yeah.
Where do you get those fermentation jars?
I went to a bulk food store that had a brewer's section. If you have like a beer and wine kit store in your area, they will have absolutely everything, all the bells and whistles. You can also go on Amazon. I picked up a couple things at the start off of Amazon. I have some fancy things like for in the winter when my house is colder, I have heat pads that my fermenters will sit on because yeast is very particular about things like acidity and temperature. And the happier you make your yeast, the more it is going to do exactly what you want it to. If it's unhappy, it's going to start doing other things like dying early or producing sulfites, which are, you'll probably still get something you can drink, but it won't be as tasty. So you can start playing with things like that. The other good thing about the airlock, which is that thing at the top, is because the carbon dioxide is being produced and it creates positive pressure, bacteria and fruit flies and things cannot go back through it, because for microorganisms, it is actually very hard for them to move to a low pressure, from a low pressure to a high pressure area. So you're basically insulating your ferment from bacteria getting into it. And bacteria consumes alcohol and produces vinegar, which is where we get red wine vinegar and rice wine vinegar. It is wine that has been converted. And this is what it looked like when I was finished. After the primary fermentation, I transferred it into a fresh, clean vessel, because what happens is the yeast you add in this tiny little packet, but it reproduces. So you get double the yeast, quadruple the yeast, octuple the yeast. And by the time it's done, all of this yeast that has killed itself with alcohol dies and will slowly settle to the bottom of your jar. And then once it starts to look clearer, you take a siphon and you transfer it into a new jar. Typically, you'll do that 2 or 3 times until you see that there's no yeast left over when you do it. And that means you've cleaned out all that yeast. Dead yeast has a very unique flavor that I can't really describe other than it is horrible. So you don't really want it floating around in your wine. And then it comes out, you can see those are perfectly clear. You can see pretty much right through them. And my little Furnal Equinox glass from the party theme year, live in large. And I label my wine and I date my wine because this I actually put in my basement. It is important to separate your batches, otherwise you're going to end up with a bottle from 5 years ago mixed in with a bottle from a month ago and you don't really know. Homemade, everyone knows like old wine is expensive. Homemade wine, typically you can age it. Those alcohol molecules are very simple when it's first finished, but they are going to interact with each other. There's still chemistry going on. And it adds complexness, but for homemade wine, the cutoff point is about 2 years. After that, you're not going to see any change to it anymore. So when I make a batch that I'm very proud of and I bottle it, I will save a couple bottles and set them aside so that I can try them in a year or 2 years and sort of learn how my winemaking has changed and if I've made something interesting that I can age. And this is it in my basement where I stored it. Those swing top bottles I also got at a brewing supply store. You can also just, if you like beer, drink Rolsch beer. Every Rolsch beer bottle is a swing top. You wash them really good when you're done and sanitize them, and you can use them again and again and again. And they are, I like them a little better because I'm not corking it, which means there is less of a chance it will explode because those seals will just burp if there's enough pressure.
You can get those at bulk farm too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bulk food store. Oh yeah, they know what they're doing.
How do those get sanitized?
I will fill my kitchen sink with hot water and add a couple capfuls of bleach. And then I just soak them, roll them around to make sure the air bubble doesn't create a pocket. Take them out, give them a real good rinse inside and outside, swish it around a few times, and you do that right before you use them. The more sterile and sanitary the inside of it is, the less likely it is that you're going to introduce something that you don't want in there that's going to eventually ruin it. You can also, I use something called Camden powder, specifically for sterilizing what I forage and bring home. It basically just kills bacteria, but it metabolizes itself in about 24 hours because it also kills yeast, and you have to add yeast to your wine. So what I'll do is I'll make my must, which is all my ingredients and things. I'll add this sterilizer to it, and I'll wait a day, and that way when I add my yeast, I know there's nothing in there that I brought in from outside. You can also make wine without adding yeast at all. Like I said, yeast is everywhere. And if you want to make what is called a country wine, in your kitchen where you're baking bread and using yeast and all these other things, a lot of good yeast are just living on the surfaces and floating around the air. So you make the ingredients of your wine and you set it on the counter open and you wait a day or two and you're going to start to see bubbles form in it. And that is carbon dioxide from yeast coming out of it. And then you know you've got your yeast in there, then you seal it up. So you're using wild yeast to make your wine. And you get very different flavors, and there's an entire different body of knowledge for how to do that properly and what it's going to taste like and what recipes are going to taste the best. This is me making apple cider. If it looks like I bought it at the store, it's because I went to Safeway and they were selling these 1-gallon glass jars of organic pasteurized apple juice, which means they pressed the apples, they boiled it to make under pressure to make sure there was no bacteria in it, and then they bottled it and I bought it at the store. It was not alcoholic when I bought it, but because I already knew all the ingredients were in there and it was sterile, all I had to do was open the top, pour in the yeast, and pop the airlock on it. It was the simplest thing I ever did, and at the start, it was great to get into it because it really encourages you and it really makes you feel good to have these things work. And the simpler you start out, the easier it's going to be, and then you can start building on that knowledge. Yeah, so I bought apple juice and made hard apple cider. You got a question?
Yeah, so how do you know, like, once you're done making, like, the wine, that all the carbon dioxide has left the bottle, just so it doesn't, like, explode later on?
Yeah, so it will take about 2 months to make a batch of wine. Mm-hmm. The first 10 or so days are your fermentation. That's when you've added your yeast, and those airlocks, you'll see them as the pressure releases, they'll go bloop, bloop, bloop. And that's also very satisfying when you're walking through your house and you can hear it happening. And it's also very nerve-wracking when you're waiting for it to start, because you've added everything and you have to seal it and just walk away. And I've had it take up to 5 days before the yeast actually really took. And you're just waiting and you're going, did I do something wrong? Is my yeast dead? and then it starts doing it, and you feel much better. And to answer your question, eventually that bubbling will stop because all the yeast starts to die towards the end, and they stop producing more carbon dioxide, which means it's going to stop bubbling out of it. And once it's stopped, you still have to let it sit and rest so that the yeast can start settling out of it. So typically by the time you bottle it, if it's been sitting there for like 6 more weeks, you know the yeast in it is dead because it's run out of food and starved. Literally. And you're pulling it off the yeast as it settles out, so you're leaving it all behind. Usually you're not going to worry about them exploding unless you're putting them in a hot closet or you're back sweetening by adding more sugar after the fact. Otherwise, the chances of it happening, pretty slim as long as you're conscientious of what you're doing and when. And you can see I have pieces of tape on this one, which is, it's got some dates there when I started it, when I racked it, which is siphoning it off. And then all those numbers off to the side are using a tool that allows me to measure the amount of alcohol in it. The basic principle is if you stir a bunch of sugar into water, it makes the water more dense. And alcohol is less dense than water. So once all that sugar's been turned into alcohol, it will be less dense, which affects its buoyancy. So the tool I have is a float with just a scale on it. So when I start and I have all the sugar in it, I drop the float in and I get a number. That's my initial gravity, basically the buoyancy of it. When it's done, I drop the float in again and I get a much lower number because it's going to float lower. And then you just do some math. And it tells you how much sugar has been converted into alcohol as a percentage. Yeah, that's about as crazy and complex as I get with it because it is fun to track those things if you're into the chemistry of it or anything. And I don't do it every time. And here again, you can see how clear it got, how nice compared to a couple photos ago. You can just see it's cloudy in some of those because there's still all the yeast and sediment and things like that in it. So that's a lot of the stuff I do in the kitchen. This is something I do outside. So that's my backyard fireplace. It came free with the house, so I figured I'd make use of it. And that is a bowl of sausage and vegetable. And you can just see up at the top there my cast iron frying pan. So just for fun in the summer, me and my sister would sit outside and I would cook on the campfire. Because who doesn't love that? And I would put all those vegetables in my cast iron, cover it with tin foil, and just leave it on the hot coals. And you get pretty much a delicious like stir-fry bake. I might have a picture. Oh, yeah. So this is prison wine. It is peach juice. I will say if you are buying store-bought juice to make your wine, you want to look at what kinds of preservatives are in it. You can do a little bit of research on Google and learn which ones kill yeast and which ones don't. Because you can buy, like usually the more organic or the more like natural products will have fewer preservatives, which just means they probably heated it to kill anything in it. Since you're going to be adding yeast or bacteria or whatever to it, you don't want it to be chock full of preservatives that are going to kill those things. It's just going to sit there until it starts growing mold, because mold doesn't really care. And we're back to bread, but I did have a couple other things I wanted to talk about. Gardening. Just this summer, I cleared out some of the bush along my back fence and started a garden. Some things worked, some things didn't. Honestly, it was just fun to turn the soil over and plant. I did a mix. I bought some seeds at the grocery store. I brought home things like green onion shoots from work. Because if anyone here likes green onions and you buy them at the grocery store, if you have that white bulb at the end that you throw out, if you see roots on the bottom of it, what you can do is you get a glass of water and some rubber bands and you suspend it over the top of the glass so that the roots are in the water. And very quickly, you are going to see the roots start growing, and then the green onion starts growing out of the top again. You're basically propagating it, and then once it's got some nice roots, you take it out and you plant it in your garden. And it will keep growing the top of it. So you can just go out with a pair of scissors and snip off a few, and then they'll start growing back. Get a little bit of plant food, follow the instructions on it when you're watering. It'll keep the soil nice and rich so that the green onion you're eating isn't taking everything out of it. You can do fertilizer and stuff. But yeah, I had some seeds that I started indoors, either in water or a piece of paper towel. Everyone grew a bean plant when they were in grade school. It's basically the same thing, but you're actually getting something out of it. Someday I'm going to go grow dandelion microgreens, which are very delicious on sandwiches. That is just sprinkling a bunch of seeds on wet paper towel, leaving it somewhere out of direct sunlight, and you get basically this little bed of grass. You take some kitchen scissors and snip, 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 and throw it into your salad. I also went to the grocery store when they had the garden center and just bought a whole bunch of already started seedlings. That is a much safer and easier way. It's really sad when you try to grow something in your house and one day it just falls over and dies. So you can do that too. They're a couple bucks each, and I had zucchinis, big beautiful zucchinis this year. I had a couple of tomato plants that grew really well. I had a hot pepper plant. Those ones are really fun. You can stick them in a window box in your apartment or grow them on your kitchen counter if it's nice and sunny, and then you have nice hot peppers. You can grow them in your living room if you have a big enough pot. There's so many ways, even if you're limited on space or you don't have a backyard. I've seen people do vertical gardening on like an apartment patio.
Just to go back to the sprouts that you mentioned, I grow sprouts at home, and you can also, if you don't have the like surface area for doing it on paper towel, I have a very small kitchen and I share it with 3 roommates.
Yeah.
There's also a way to do it in mason jars on a stand. You get a mesh lid, you store them upside down, you just rinse them twice a day and let the water drain out through the mesh lid upside down.
Oh, that's
And
clever.
I do clover sprouts on my windowsill in my kitchen that way.
That's
and it takes
delicious.
up a lot less surface area. So you can buy the jars on Amazon if anybody has a tiny kitchen. That's an option.
Well, and for anyone that doesn't know, a mason jar is basically anything you would buy pasta sauce in. You can keep those and clean them. My family always called it Dutch Tupperware. But you can also use Tupperwares. You just put the bottom of it with your paper towel or whatever. And I harvested dandelion seeds. It's really easy. You wait until they're nice and fluffy, the dandelion heads, and then you pluck off all that stuff that you'd be blowing and making wishes and whatever, and you put it in a Ziploc bag and you just mash it up with your fingers. All the seeds are going to fall off and fall to the bottom. All the fluff is going to stay in the top. You scoop out the fluff and the seeds are left over. You get hundreds of them in like 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've done sprouting before with like sprouted lentils, bean sprouts.
Yeah.
Sorry, like beans. But do you have any recommendations for like when I tried making it, it just smelled so bad. Like I did mung beans. Do you have any like?
I actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
I tried to sprout mung beans at home and I had the same problem. Cover your jar. Mung beans don't want sunlight. They need to grow in the dark or they're going to rot immediately.
Yeah. So my recommendation for that would be to use a Tupperware container. Same thing. You're going to seal it, and then you can just put it in your kitchen cupboard somewhere away from the light.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are other things I know that want to be out of direct sunlight. And basically what you're ensuring there is they're not actually photosynthesizing to grow. They're just using the energy of the seed and whatever is in the water and paper towel or jar that they're resting on. Because paper towel is paper. There is organics. There's plant food in it, basically. And yeah, you are going to get something that grows very quickly but does not actually start getting big. And that's where you get sprouts from. At the restaurant I work at, my boss is obsessed with pea shoots, and we use them as a garnish on everything. And there is a person locally that we buy them from that does it industrially. Yeah. Go ahead.
For getting started plants, the farmer's market is always a good place in the spring.
Definitely.
Like late March, early April through mid-June, you'll have just so many options for pre-started plants.
I know a lot of people who get more seriously into gardens will plan ahead, and they will be ordering sprouts from like a garden supply company, and they'll do custom orders. You can say, I want like 3 bell pepper sprouts and 2 tomato sprouts and 6 zucchini sprouts, because I just love zucchinis. If you have a garden and in the fall you're harvesting a lot of delicious fruits and vegetables and potatoes, you can store them. You can put them in your basement in like a cold area for like roots and tubers, and they'll keep for a couple months. You want to keep an eye on them. If one of them's going moldy, there is a lot of truth to the saying one bad apple spoils the bunch. You take out the rotting fruit and the rest of them are going to be okay a little bit longer. You can make jams and jellies and pickles and preserves. And once you start doing it with something you grew in your own home, it's such a cool feeling. It's like being your grandma.
Also, just a note, some plants are incredibly finicky. You can be given every tool to succeed and it will still die the first 2 times. So just don't get discouraged with that.
Yep. And that also can come down to research. There are growing zones. So you want to look up, if you want to grow a certain plant, you can just look up probably the name of the city you live in and the name of the plant and will this grow here? And there are all kinds of forums and guides and lists, and who knows, maybe in wherever you live, the soil is a little more acidic than regular, and someone will have said online, like, I've never been able to grow this plant, don't even try. But this other one grows like crazy. And you're just, by doing your due diligence and doing a little bit of research, you're just making it easier on yourself and giving yourself a better chance for success. So that is all of my topics, but we can keep talking.
I was going to say one other thing I've started doing with plants is I replace some of my landscaping with things that are edible, with raspberry bushes and blueberry bushes.
Yep.
Things like that.
Oh, and another foraging thing is there's an alley behind my house where a ton of wild raspberries grow, just all up and down it. So me and my sister every morning will make coffee in travel mugs and just walk up and down the back alley with a basket.
Do you think you'll move on to mushrooms?
Mushrooms, my sister is the mushroom expert in the house. She's got the books, she reads the Facebooks, she talks on the forums. Mushroom foraging is something I am a little nervous about starting.
Not foraging, perhaps, but
growing
it yourself.
Yeah, I would love to. I know there are a lot of guides on how to do it. Typically, you want sterile rotting wood matter, and then you just seed it with spores. You order the spores online. And still, you're going to want to be careful because a lot of mushrooms you can eat have lookalikes that you can only eat once. Go ahead.
Yeah, the easiest way I've grown mushrooms by far has been you can order like the spores.
Oh, the mushroom blocks.
And then you get no, it's actually like a bag of like just the spore.
Okay.
There's like no like wood matter.
Yeah.
And then you get like I can't remember the type of wood, but there's a specific type of wood that's often used for like hamster bedding. Those like wood chips.
Okay, and then yeah.
Is it aspen?
I think so. Yeah. And then you just
I have
put
rats.
that in like a plastic 5-gallon bucket and drill holes in the sides. And you just like soak it with water and like mix in the spores. And then
And they
in
also
2 weeks they just start sprouting out of all the holes.
Yeah, and you could absolutely have a little mushroom garden in your backyard or this corner of your kitchen. Go ahead.
You can also grow mushrooms on toilet paper towels.
Yeah. I have heard they also grow very well on Uncle Ben's. Go ahead.
Do you have any recommendations for plants that grow really well in the shade?
Really well in the shade. My bean plants did very well in the shade. My sunflowers did not. Honestly, I probably should have seen that coming. Other ones, I would say Google food plants that grow in the shade. Hi.
Typically anything that doesn't have to flower, that you don't want to flower, like lettuce, herbs, all that, they all can go in the shade and they'll grow much better than in the sun.
That is really good to know. So that's your general guide is if it doesn't flower, then probably great.
Rhubarb does excellent in the shade as well.
Yes, I have 2 very big rhubarb plants in my backyard, and I get rhubarb every summer, and I will make a rhubarb pie or a rhubarb wine.
Do you force your rhubarb? Do you force grow it?
No, I just let it do what it does. I have started to fertilize it because I have noticed year over year it's gotten smaller.
Yeah.
I've also propagated it, which was splitting the taproot and just moving half of it away, and it just grows the rest of the plant back.
So there's this method that I heard of recently where it's like once it starts to sprout, you put this massive like a barrel over it with a hole in the top.
Okay.
And that forces it to want to go towards the light. And once you take it off, you're gonna have like this really big red stalk.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so you're basically you're creating an unideal environment for the plant.
Yeah.
which forces it to put more of its energy into growing the part you can eat.
Yeah.
Another good example of that is culling. Some fruits and vegetables will put lots and lots and lots, or they'll try to make lots and lots and lots of fruits. And that means all of the energy from the plant is getting split up between all these fruits. So you can read guides on it, and basically at a certain point in the fruiting, you go and you cut off like half of them. And the plant's not going to try to grow any more. It just means all of that good plant food that's coming up the stalk is going to go to, like, for example, tomatoes. Instead of trying to grow 30 tomatoes, you're trying to grow 15, which means those 15 tomatoes are going to get twice as big.
Yeah, kind of on the topic of culling. So I'm not going to speak too many details about it that people I don't want to hear, but I do raise meat animals in my apartment.
Okay.
And so if people are interested in learning more about that, I would love to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I can say something too to the ethics of a lot of these hobbies. You are reducing your carbon footprint when you are growing your own vegetables in your own backyard. It is not being brought to a grocery store on a truck from a giant farm wherever.
And
it's
the
sustainable.
farmer was paid ethically.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the tree that bears like 40 fruit?
I think so. This is a landmark, right?
It's multiple landmarks. So it's a tree sculpture where this guy had like
integrated living plants?
Yeah, it was like a drupe tree, so like plums and cherries and stuff like that. And he grafted all these different fruits on it that are all related to each other. And so whenever it grows, it has all these different flowers and then produces all these different fruit.
Yeah, which is a really, I have not grown fruit trees. I would love to add some to my property someday because, I mean, you can have ornamental trees. Why not have one that makes something delicious for you? It's going to look just as pretty and your neighbors are probably going to think you're cool. But, thank you. Fruit trees are kind of universal in a lot of ways, and grafting is basically splicing a branch from one tree onto another one. The tree's not going to care, it's just going to keep sending tree food to that branch. So if you take a branch off of an apple tree and graft it onto a peach tree, you're going to have a lot of peaches and a branch that makes apples. A fun fact about apples, and actually the story of Johnny Appleseed, is based on a land baron who built his fortune during the time of colonization and like settling in the United States, when people were given a free farmstead to live on with the caveat that you must improve the land. And the easiest way to improve the land was to plant fruit trees. Look at me, I'm adding something I can eat to my land, I'm improving it. So Johnny Appleseed was a man that made his fortune selling apple saplings to people. He had basically a tree farm. And if you think about different kinds of apples, like the Macintosh apple or the Granny Smith apple, if you take a seed out of an apple because of cross-pollination between the trees and like random genetic selection, you are almost always going to get a crabapple tree. You are not going to get these big, delicious apples. All of the big, delicious apples that we have of different kinds originally came from a single tree, probably from one of those settler families who probably got very rich selling cuttings from their apple tree. So the Macintosh apples came from probably a tree on the Macintosh family farm. Granny Smith apples were someone's Granny Smith. The only way to get more of those specific apples is through grafting. You can't plant their seeds.
It's like the banana, where it's like they only have one clone and
monoculture.
Yeah. Once that next thing wipes it out, we're gonna lose all of our bananas
again.
Yep.
Kind of like the.
And I mean, that could happen. And that's the interesting thing about, there's all this discussion around genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, in our food. The truth is, pretty much since the dawn of agriculture, that is what we have been doing. We have been selectively breeding our foods. If I'm a farmer and I have 3 fields of wheat, and one of them does noticeably better than the other 2, I'm only going to keep seeds to plant from that field. Because I know if next year I plant all 3 fields with those seeds, all of my fields are going to do better. That is a GMO at that point. The only difference now is we're doing it in a laboratory and we're using fish DNA. True fact. They figured out adding fish DNA to tomatoes made it frost resistant.
That's actually really cool.
It is, but like,
also
it is kind of free. And the other thing about it is people always talk about like, oh, GMOs, DNA in our food, it's going to be bad for us. Human DNA and plant DNA are so different that to your body, it is just food. You're not going to start growing leaves. Your DNA cannot, it's like an Apple and a Microsoft.
Well, what if I want to grow leaves?
Talk to a geneticist.
Okay, fine.
I mean, there's a lot of conversations
What if
we
I
do.
want virgin evolution?
Yeah, I think they should be able to give us leaves.
Yeah. Photosynthesize instead of grocery bills.
Yeah. Anyone here a fan of Adventure Time? Fern the human?
Oh.
Yeah. Anyone else? Go ahead.
There's actually an invasive plant, at least invasive to like Ontario region, and it's called garlic mustard. And
It's so good.
it grows like super prolifically, so it's really easy to find in a lot of places.
Yep.
But if you take the leaves, they kind of have like a garlicky, like slightly spicy flavor.
I'm going to have to look for some of that because that sounds delicious.
And it's like, it's very easy to find a ton of leaves for it. And if you grind that up with like oil and like pine nuts and stuff, you can make pesto.
Yep.
And since it's invasive, you don't have to responsibly forage.
Yeah.
You can rip it up with your hands. It's pretty
You can definitely look into things like that as well. Invasive species are just everywhere, thanks to mostly humans. And it was like pretty much since we started sailing places on boats, we were bringing things with us. And some of those things just adapted incredibly well to the environments we took them to and started killing the things that had been living there for millions of years. So if you want to go chop down a whole bunch of invasive trees and do stuff with them, like someone somewhere is going to want to thank you. Probably a lot of people. And yeah, and then also if you're foraging for a native species, do it ethically. Yeah, and if you are doing it ethically, it just means when you come back next year, there is still going to be some. And yeah, that's another aspect of gardening is you take care of your garden. You fertilize it, you turn the soil over, you mulch some leaves into it, and you're taking care of it year over year. Leaving the leaves when they fall in the fall is a very good idea. Bees hibernate in the leaves, all the little critters make tunnels under the snow, and then you can mulch it in the spring and you have a healthy lawn.
Ew, gross lawns.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not the best if you live in Texas.
Replace your grass with clover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard that especially because the weather has been unseasonable, it's very likely that this year it's going to be very droughty.
Okay.
So yes, definitely this time of the year, keep the leaves on it, let it get real, and like put more wood chips and stuff so that it can
retain moisture, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that helps. And also, I mean, if you have gutters on your home, just buy an old plastic barrel and collect that water and use it to water your garden. You're not using tap water anymore, which means there's no additives and you're not running up your water bill. Yeah, and it's just like, this is sort of the mindset I fell into as I went through this journey over the past 4 years. And just changing the way you think about and approach the world and seeing things, and instead of going, oh, I should throw that in the trash, like, well, I can use that, or I can cook that, or like, well, that looks a little off. Like, this bread is stale. I'm not going to throw it out. I'm going to make bread pudding or bread beer. I have made kvass. It is a Russian bread beer. Basically from the time when drinking a slightly alcoholic beverage was much safer than drinking water because water had things in it that would kill you and we hadn't learned how to get rid of them. They would just make alcohol out of anything. The settlers did it with cider. They would just make crabapple cider and drink that because the alcohol kills the things that are going to upset your stomach. And kvass is using rye bread. Yeah. Well, I think that's everything I have to talk about. Thank you guys so much for coming to my panel. And if you would like to come to another one, tonight at 11:30, I will be hosting the Midnight Howl.
What is the Midnight Howl?
Yes.
So we are going to be meeting in a panel room, and we're going to have a little bit of a story time. And then we are going to go outside to the ferry terminal here, and we are going to do a howl.
Oh.